You have an ID? I asked. Knowing who the threats were was a big part of my job, and this was the first I'd heard of this one. For the first time since I arrived in the office, Kevin had my interest.
Just a name. Adrian Barrett. You heard of him?
I shook my head, which I didn't like doing.
English guy, like I said. We're trying to work out where he was before, who he might be working for, if anyone. Seems like he's putting the word around that he's in charge, but that could be a screen. The guy in charge doesn't turn up to do the donkey work, does he?
Asking me, because he didn't know for himself. Kevin ran a counterfeit operation, a good and profitable one. The man knew how to run a business, let's make that clear right now. But he hadn't been involved in the dirtiest corners of the business until Jamieson's arrest pushed him there. Now, he was up to his armpits in the filth and didn't know where to swim for safety. Not usually, I said. Depends how big he is to start with, I suppose.
Aye, well, he's becoming an issue. Everything's becoming a fucking issue.
He was shaking his head and looking tired. The small things were mounting up, because the organisation wasn't a well-oiled machine anymore. It was causing the sort of frustration that coaxed a rare sweary word out of Kevin's usually pristine mouth.
We have so many things we need to clean up, he went on. There's stuff that still hasn't been done from months ago. Stuff we should have gotten out of the way, but we were too busy keeping our heads down. There's new stuff coming along all the time. You'll have to get on top of a lot of that.
Sure. What's my title?
You'll be security consultant. The job Frank McLeod was doing before he disappeared,
he said.
You remember old Frank?
I smiled a little and nodded. If you've been in the business in Glasgow at any point in the last 40 years, you know of Frank McLeod. I've been in it for 19 years, since I was 18. Disappeared was business speak for killed off and buried without the body ever being found. We knew he had been murdered on Jamieson's orders by a hitman called Callum McLean, who then told his interesting little story to the police. But they couldn't peg the killing on Jamieson in any way, so that was another crime for which he wasn't convicted, despite the few for which he was.
You'll be providing security advice for the club. Some pubs, some bookies, some of the legit stuff that Jamieson has. You don't have to do anything, though. The security mostly takes care of itself. We have people for that. Just put in the occasional appearance. I think that was all Frank used to do. Make sure the legit employees know your official job title in case the police ask them.
That all made sense, but I'll admit I was a little uncomfortable having to step into Frank's shoes. I wasn't going to be doing his job, not his real job. He was a hitman, and that was a line I'd never crossed. But people would see me doing the security consultant job he did, and they would make the comparison. They would think I was now as important as Frank had been, and that would make me a target.
Listen, Kevin went on. There's a job I want you to start with, and I don't want you to laugh.
I raised my eyebrows. When you're a freelancer, you can be choosy if you really want to be. Won't do much for your reputation, and your reputation is what's going to get you work. But it's up to you what jobs you do. If you can afford to say no, and you want to say no, then go ahead and say no. Not when you're an organisation, man. When you're on the payroll, you have to do the jobs you're given.
I want you to go around and kick 7 bells out of Kirk Webster. I know that's a pathetic place to start, but it still hasn't been done, and it needs to be.
Is that all that needs to be done?
Well,
Kevin shrugged.
For now, it is.
I stood up and I shook his hand, like a new employee delighted to get through the job interview. There was something about that little office that made me want to play at being legit. That feeling had passed by the time I was out in the street, getting into Ronnie's car. He had his little Astra parked in the single line of parking spaces in front of Curry's place. The car was too clean, I thought. Maybe too new as well. It was a work car that nobody should ever spot. We were in Hillington, not far south of the river in an industrial area full of engineering firms and warehouses. Curry's was a single-storey white building, brick front and corrugated.